Hey, is this mic on? There's a line from Mean Girls that almost everybody knows. You can't sit with us. People laugh when they hear it. They quote it. They put it on t-shirts. They turn it into memes. But every time I hear those words, I don't laugh. I remember. Because I don't think that line became iconic because of a movie. I think it became iconic because almost every woman has lived some version of it. Maybe it wasn't a lunch table. Maybe it was a sleepover. Maybe it was a birthday party. Maybe it was a quinceañera. Maybe it was a group chat. Maybe it was the playground. Different places, same feeling. You can't sit with us. I don't think little girls are born believing they don't belong. I think they learn it. Sometimes through words, sometimes through silence, sometimes through invitations that never came. And if I trace that feeling back, I know exactly where my story begins. I was 9 years old when my family moved from Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua to Lee Summit, Missouri. Everything was new. The streets, the school, the language, even the way kids play together felt different. I still remember the first day of school. I wasn't thinking about making friends. I wasn't thinking about fitting in. Honestly, I was just hoping to survive the day. The night before, my mom gave me one piece of advice. She looked at me and said, "Mija, si quieres jugo de naranja, lo único que tienes que decir es orange juice." And that was it. 2 words. So the next morning, I kept repeating them to myself. Orange juice, orange juice, orange juice, over and over again. I was terrified I'd forget. Terrified I'd get to the cafeteria and freeze. Terrified if I needed something, I didn't know how to ask for it. It's funny what feels important when you're 9 years old. Not making friends, just remembering 2 words. Finally, it was lunchtime. I walked through the line holding my tray. My heart was pounding. The lunch lady smiled at me. She pointed to the drinks, orange juice and chocolate milk. She was waiting for my answer. I took a deep breath and looked at her. And I said the only English words I knew with complete confidence. Orange juice. Picked up the carton and handed it to me. And that was it. 2 words. A carton of orange juice. To anybody else, it probably looked like an ordinary Tuesday. To me, it felt like climbing a mountain. Because for the first time that day, I had asked for something and someone understood me. Looking back now, I don't think I was really asking for orange juice. I think what I was asking, is there room for me here? And for that brief moment, the answer was yes. There was one class I couldn't wait for every week, choir. It didn't matter that my English wasn't very good yet. Music didn't ask me to be fluent. It asked me to listen, to breathe, to sing. One of the very first songs we learned was Lean on Me. And if you were around my age, you probably know it. And every single time I hear that song, I'm 9 years old again, standing in that choir room, trying to learn a new language, trying to find my place. I didn't understand every English word, but somehow I understood exactly what that song meant, because music has a way of speaking to us before language ever does. I remember looking around that choir room for the first time since moving here. I wasn't worried about saying the wrong thing. I wasn't worried about my accent. I wasn't worried about whether people understood me. We were all singing the same song. And for a few minutes, I wasn't the new girl from Mexico. I wasn't trying to catch up. I was just another kid in choir. Looking back now, I realized I wasn't just learning English. I was learning kindness. I was learning what it felt like when teachers were patient with me, when classmates smiled instead of judging me, when someone gave me the space instead of making me feel ashamed for not already knowing the answer. And I think that's why Lean on Me is still part of me, not because of the beautiful song, because every time I hear it, I remember the people who leaned towards me instead of away from me, the people who chose patience over judgment, the people who made room for me before I ever felt I deserved a place. It's funny. When I was 9 years old, I thought I was learning English. And I realized now I was learning what belonging felt like. And maybe that's why this song stayed with me through all these years. Because without realizing, it became the soundtrack to everything this episode is about. Not competition, not comparison, not proving you're enough. Just one human being quietly reminding another, you don't have to carry this by yourself. Not everyone made me feel that way. I remember one of my friend's moms inviting me over to her house. She was so kind. She welcomed me in without making me feel any different. I still think about her because sometimes one adult can change the way a child sees the world. Not every part of school felt like choir. When recess came, everyone ran outside. Kids were laughing, running, playing tag, playing dodgeball, climbing on the jungle gym. I remember standing there wanting so bad to join them. Then I heard one of the kids say, "She doesn't even speak English. She doesn't understand." I don't want to play with her. The thing is, I understood. I just couldn't speak it. I understood every word they were saying about me. I just didn't have the English to tell them. I do understand. I'm trying. Please give me a chance. But here's what I've learned long before I became fluent in English. Human behavior, it's its own language. You don't need words to recognize kindness or rejection, judgment, or comparison. I learned to read people's faces before I could answer them, their tone before I could understand every sentence, their body language before I knew all the vocabulary. It's a strange way. Not speaking a language made me pay even closer attention to people. And the people always tell you who they are, sometimes without saying a single word. There's a particular kind of loneliness in understanding rejection without having the language to answer it. Looking back now, I don't blame those kids. We were children. Children notice differences before they understand them. But I never forgot that afternoon. Because in a span of just a few hours, I experienced two completely different versions of humanity. One child made me feel like I didn't belong. One woman made me feel like I did. Isn't that amazing? How one person can just question your worth, while another one can remind you you never had to. I think about her often. I wonder if she had any idea what she gave me. She probably thought she was simply just inviting a little girl over to play. What she actually gave me was my first lesson in belonging. Not because everyone welcomed me, but because she did. One person can't stop every cruel moment, but one person can become a reason a child doesn't lose hope. I've never forgotten her, and I hope, without realizing it, I've become that person for someone else. I wish I could tell you that was the last time I questioned whether I belonged. It wasn't. That feeling has a way of following you, changing faces, changing places, but always asking the same question. Why wasn't I invited? As I got older, I remember hearing about sleepovers that had already happened. Everyone seemed to have stories, inside jokes, memories they had created together. I'd smile, pretend it didn't bother me, act like I didn't even want it to go, but deep down, I wonder why. Children become detectives. They're constantly trying to solve the mystery of belonging. When they're included, they think, people like me. When they're excluded, they don't usually think, maybe there wasn't enough room. They think, what's wrong with me? There is a time I wasn't invited to being part of a quinceañera. As a child, I didn't have the words to tell myself, maybe there were other reasons I'll never know. Instead, I filled in the blanks. Maybe I wasn't skinny enough. Maybe I wasn't pretty enough. Maybe my family wasn't rich enough. I don't know if any of those things were true. What I know is those are the stories I told myself. And children are incredibly good at writing stories they were never meant to carry. I also remember playing with dolls in 6th grade. I loved creating stories, giving each doll a personality, a family, a little world of their own. To me, that wasn't childish. It was imagination, until someone laughed, until someone made me feel embarrassed for loving something so innocent. It's amazing how quickly joy can become shame. Not because joy changed, but because someone else's opinion became louder than yours. Then there were comments about my body. Friends' moms would comment on my weight. I don't think they were trying to be cruel. Maybe that's how people spoke to them. Maybe they believed they were helping. But when you're a little girl, you don't hear a passing comment. You hear a verdict. You hear you've gained weight. You hear you're not enough. You begin looking at yourself through someone else's eyes, standing in front of the mirror trying to figure out what needs to be changed before you finally belong. I don't think those moments changed who I was. They changed the story I believe who I was. And sometimes that's even more powerful, because stories have a way of becoming identities if we never question who wrote them. It took me years to realize those weren't my stories. They were my fears. And belonging was never supposed to be earned in the first place. Somewhere between being little girls and becoming women, something changed. We stopped asking, "Do you want to play?" and started asking, "Do I measure up?" When did this happen? Who taught us that other women's beauty somehow took away from our own? Who taught us that another woman's success meant there was less success left for us? Who taught us that if someone else was chosen, we become less worthy? I don't think we were born believing those things. I think we inherit them. We learn them in quiet ways, from conversations around the dinner table, from magazines, from movies, from music, from reality TV, from novelas. I grew up watching novelas where two women were almost fighting over one man. One woman was the hero, one woman was the villain, one woman had to lose. Nobody ever stopped to ask, why aren't these women friends? Why do they always have to be enemies? And then there was Mean Girls, the popular girl, the pretty girl, the other girl. We watched Katie change everything about herself. We watched Regina weaponize a burn book. We laughed, we quoted it, and without realizing it, we were taking notes. We learned who got invited, who got left out, who had power, who belonged. We even dressed up as the characters for Halloween. But we were watching more than the movie. And we were watching girls learn that belonging could disappear overnight, that popularity had rules, that acceptance could be taken away, that another girl wasn't someone to understand. She was someone to beat. Maybe that's why so many of us grew up believing another woman's happiness somehow became the expense of our own. Maybe we've simply handed the wrong script, because the older I get, the more I believe women are my competition. They're my mirrors. That idea changed everything for me. Now, when another woman triggers something inside me, I try to pause, and instead of asking, who does she think she is? I ask, what is she showing me? Maybe she's brave enough to do something I've been afraid to try. Maybe she's asking for something I've convinced myself I don't deserve. Maybe she's living the life I secretly dreamed about. Maybe what I'm feeling isn't jealous at all. Maybe it's grief. Grief for the version of myself I've been too afraid to become. And that's a very different conversation. Because mirrors aren't enemies. They're invitations. Invitations to grow. Invitations to heal. Invitations to become more of ourselves. I think we've mistaken another woman's light for the thing casting our shadow, when maybe her light was never taking anything from us. Maybe it was simply showing us what was possible, and maybe it's just time to write a different story. The older I get, the more I realize words don't describe people. Sometimes they decide who people become in the eyes of everyone around them. I remember growing up and hearing labels thrown around so carelessly. She's weird. She's stuck up. She's too much. Or they whisper about her sexuality like it was a piece of gossip. And let's just be clear. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being a lesbian. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the malice behind the whisper. The way people use an assumption to shrink an entire human being down to a single rumor. One opinion, one careless comment. Someone says, she's weird. Now everyone meets her, looking at her for that proof that she's weird. Someone says, she's full of herself. Now, confidence becomes arrogance before she even had the chance to introduce herself. Someone starts a rumor, and suddenly, people aren't just getting to know the person, they're getting to know the rumor. It's amazing how one sentence can become someone else's reputation. And it's just as amazing as how one sentence can become someone else's present. I still remember words that were spoken to me decades ago. I wonder if the people who said them to me even remember. Probably not. That's the thing about words. The person who says them often gets to move on. The person who receives them sometimes carries them for years. That's why I believe words have power. Not because they're loud, because they linger. Sometimes people ask, why is bullying such a problem? And I always find myself wondering, who taught them? Because children aren't born looking for another child and deciding they don't belong. They learn it. I know. I was the girl in the playground, the little girl who heard, she doesn't speak English. She doesn't understand. I don't want to play with her. Those kids aren't evil. They are children. And children are always watching how adults talk to people, watching who gets included, watching who gets laughed at, watching whose body gets criticized, watching who gets called weird, watching who becomes the punchline. Children don't become bullies in a vacuum. They practice what they see. Maybe that's why bullying never really disappeared. Maybe it just grew up. Maybe it traded the school hallway for the office, the playground for the social media, the cafeteria for the group chat. Maybe it became quieter, more polished, better dressed. But underneath, it's still asking the same question. Who belongs? And maybe the better question isn't, why are the kids bullying? Maybe it's, what are we teaching them about belonging? Because every time we gossip, every time we reduce someone to a label, every time we laugh instead of speaking up, we're teaching the next generation what connection is supposed to look like. I don't want my son growing up believing the way to feel bigger is to make someone feel smaller. I want him to learn that belonging grows every time we make room for one more person. Because that's the world that I wish I would have walked into that playground. And maybe it's the world we still have time to build. But building a different world starts with recognizing the one we carry inside us. The thing about childhood wounds is that they don't stay in childhood. They grow up with us. They follow us into friendships, relationships, into workplaces, and sometimes into motherhood. When I became a mom, I thought making friends would be easy. My husband would always be taking our son to the park while I was at work. He'd come home telling me about the parents he'd met, the conversations he'd had, the little community that seemed to form so naturally. So I remember thinking, this is how you make mom friends. I started taking my son to the park more often. There was a group that we kept running into. All the kids seemed to know each other. The moms did too. They were outdoorsy, nature-loving, the kind of woman I imagined myself building a friendship with. My son loved playing with their kids. One day he came over running to me. His little face looked so disappointed. "Mommy, they don't want to play with me." My heart broke. Not just because I was hearing my son say those words, but because somewhere inside me, I was hearing the little girl in the playground all over again. That's the thing about old wounds. They don't always reopen. Sometimes they simply remind you they're still there. Nobody prepares you for the fact that rejection doesn't end when you leave middle school. Sometimes it follows you into adulthood. And sometimes it follows you into motherhood. People warn you about postpartum depression. They talk about the sleepless nights. They talk about how much your identity changes. What they don't talk about is how hard it's to make mom friends. So eventually I reached out to one of the moms and I asked where everyone usually met up. And she kindly told me she couldn't invite me. that it wasn't her place. They already had their group. I don't share this because I think they were trying to be unkind. Honestly, I don't know their story. Maybe there were reasons I knew nothing about. What surprised me wasn't what happened. It was what those boundaries woke up something inside me. A little later, I ran into her again at another event, and I saw her across the room. For a second, I thought about walking over and saying hi, or at least they felt like they did. And she kept walking. Immediately, I started talking myself out of it. Don't read into it. Maybe she didn't see me. Maybe she was distracted. Maybe she was in a hurry. I wanted to believe that, but another voice quietly crept in. Maybe I'm just not cool enough. The moment I thought it, I realized the voice wasn't new. It was the same voice that had been following me since I was a little girl. The one that wondered, why wasn't I invited? Why not me? What's wrong with me? Sometimes they simply remind you they're still there. And every once in a while, those childhood wounds come knocking again. Not because you haven't grown, but because motherhood introduces you to a brand new version of vulnerability. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't really about one text message or a group of moms. It was about every moment in my life that had taught me to question my worth. For years, I've been asking what's wrong with me. Healing has taught me to ask a different question. Do I actually want to belong somewhere, or I have to convince people to let me in? Those are two different questions. There's something else I started noticing when I got older. Sometimes a man would treat me with kindness. Someone I thought was incredibly handsome wanting to get to know me. And every now and then, instead of another woman saying, I'm so happy for you, the question became, why her? Or why not me? Every time that happened, I found myself mourning what sisterhood could have been. Not because of the man, but because of us. Because I kept thinking, why are we standing across from each other when we could be standing besides each other? Maybe that's another script we inherited. The idea that one woman is chosen, the rest of us somehow lose. That love is scarce. That attention is limited. That someone else's happiness comes to the expense of our own. I don't believe that anymore. Love isn't a trophy. People aren't prizes. And women were never meant to become rivals over someone's ability to choose. If someone chooses another woman, I genuinely hope she's loved well, even if our lives have passed in complicated ways. Even if we've loved the same person, even if our stories overlap, I still hope she heals. I hope she finds peace. I hope she finds love that feels safe. I hope she becomes the fullest version of herself, because another woman's healing has never taken anything away from mine. Another woman's joy doesn't make mine impossible. Another woman's success doesn't make me less successful. And another woman's love story doesn't erase the one that's meant for me. What's meant for me will never require me to take it from someone else. That sentence changed my life. Because abundance doesn't ask us to compete. Fear does. There's enough. There's enough love, enough beauty, enough opportunity, enough joy, enough belonging for all of us. Maybe sisterhood begins with the moment we stop asking, why her? And start asking, how can I celebrate her while still believing there's enough for me too? The more I heal, the more I realize we were never meant to compete. We were meant to witness each other, to celebrate each other, to remind one another of what's possible. Because when one woman rises, she gives the rest of us permission to believe we can rise too. When I started felicitating women's circles, women from completely different backgrounds would walk into the room carrying invisible armor. Every circle began the same way. Sage drifting through the air, candles flickering, cushions arranged in a circle, a space intentionally created to feel safe. And yet, most of us still arrived protecting ourselves. Some hid behind success, some behind perfection, some behind humor, some barely spoke at all. At first, we made the safe small talk. Where are you from? What do you do? Do you have kids? The questions that we ask, whether we're deciding it's safe to be ourselves. Honestly, middle school should have come with free therapy. Then someone would tell the truth. Really, the truth. Maybe it was grief, motherhood, shame, loneliness. Then something happened that changed the way I understood sisterhood. Not the kind you talk about, the kind you feel. This year has been hard. My husband and I have had a very difficult season. Like a lot of couples, we've done the work, the uncomfortable work, learning to hear each other instead of simply reacting, learning how to find our way back to one another. Before this, I had a miscarriage. There's some kind of grief that make the world incredibly quiet. The kind where people don't know what to say, where you don't even know what you need. You just know something inside you has changed. One of my husband's friends came over that afternoon, and then she stayed. That's what I remember the most. She stayed. She didn't try to fix my grief. She didn't tell me everything happens for a reason. She didn't rush me toward healing. She simply stayed. I didn't know how much I needed someone to stay until someone finally did. For most of my life, I've been the one checking in, the one asking, how can I help? The one sitting beside people during the most difficult moments of their lives. I've always believed showing up matters, but somewhere along the way, I became really good at giving love and really uncomfortable receiving it. That afternoon reminded me support isn't something you earn. Sometimes love looks like someone bringing you lunch. Sometimes it looks like someone entertaining your toddler so you can finally excel. But most of the time, love looks like someone refusing to let you be alone in your pain. I don't remember every conversation we had that day. I don't remember exactly what we ate. I don't remember what time she left. What I do remember is how I felt. I felt less alone. And sometimes that's the greatest gift another human can give you. Not advice, answers, but presence. Just their presence. For years, I thought sisterhood was something I was supposed to give. That afternoon, I learned it was also something I was allowed to receive. The most important thing we can pass on is a different story. A story where another woman's success isn't my failure. A story where my kindness is stronger than comparison. A story where there's always room for one more seat. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not pretending the wound never happened. Not pretending we've always gotten it right. Healing is deciding. It stops with me. I can't go back and change the little girl standing on the playground. I can't erase the comments about my body. I can't change the sleepovers I wasn't ever invited to. And I can't rewrite stories I told myself about the quinceañera. But I can become the woman she needed. The woman that notices someone standing alone. The woman who smiles first. The woman who says, come here. The woman who protects someone else's name when they're not in the room. And the woman who celebrates one another's woman's success because she knows someone else's light doesn't make hers any dimmer. Because once we've known what exclusion feels like, you have a choice. You can recreate it, or you can become the reason someone else never has to feel it. When I look back in my life, I don't remember the people who made me feel small nearly as much as I remember the people who made room. The lunch lady who smiled when I asked for orange juice. The teachers who were patient with me. My friend's mom who welcomed me into her home. The woman who trusted another woman enough to tell the truth. My husband's friend who stayed. And if I get to be remembered in someone else's story, I hope I'm remembered as someone who made room, someone who noticed, someone who simply smiled, and someone who said, come here, we've been saving you a seat. Maybe that's what sisterhood has always been, making room for one more person. Before I go, it's time for the homework, because around here, we don't just listen, we do the work. Hey, this is Luisa, and this week, I want you to think about someone who made you feel like you belonged. Maybe it was a teacher, a coach, grandparent, your friend's mom, a neighbor, a stranger, someone who probably has no idea they changed your life, but they're still here. Tell them, send them a text, write them a letter, leave them a voicemail. Tell them what they taught you. Tell them how they made you feel, because people rarely know the impact they've had on someone else's life. And if they're no longer here, tell their story. Keep their kindness alive by passing it on. Then do one more thing. Become the person for someone else. Notice the people standing there alone. Invite someone into the conversation. Celebrate another woman's success. Protect someone else's name when they're not in the room. Be the person that says, come here, because belonging doesn't happen by accident. Someone creates it. This week, let that someone be you. Until next time, save someone a seat. And if anything from today's episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on Instagram at HeyIsThisMicOnPodcast, or email me at HeyIsThisMicOn@gmail.com. Whether you have a story to share, a question, or you just want to tell me what this episode meant to you, I'd love to hear from you. And if these conversations have become part of your week, make sure you hit follow so you can never miss an episode. It helps this community grow and helps these stories reach people who need it the most. Hey, is this mic on?